Om Shanti, and I'm not sure where in the world you are, whether it's good morning or good afternoon or good evening for you, but welcome to this very special event, Spirituality in Society, with an extraordinary person. His name is Richard Barrett, and he's an author, speaker, coach, and an internationally recognized thought leader of human values in business and society. He is the president of the Barrett Academy for the Advancement of Human Values, the founder of Barrett Values Centre, fellow of the World Business Academy, and former values coordinator for the World Bank. So welcome, Richard. It's an honor and privilege to be in conversation with you today. And I'm Sister Jayanti from the Brahma Kumaris. Welcome.
Shanti. And Sister Jayanti, I know who you are. We've been friends for a long time.
Yes, I thought I'd just mention, I'll just put a little label. But it's wonderful that you've made time to be with us today, Richard.
Thank you.
You're in London and I'm in India, but technology makes it possible for us to communicate across the oceans.
It does. And in fact, it makes it possible for everybody to communicate across the oceans.
Exactly, that's right. And it seems to be something that we become even more aware of, not just connectivity by technology, but also the inherent intrinsic connection that all human beings across the world have, for better or for worse. And so the virus has highlighted one particular aspect of connectivity. It's very, very contagious, but also the cooperation of the world in trying to deal with this is also something that's highly visible.
Yes, it's had it's affected people with sadness, with grief, but also it's provided an opportunity for new ways of being. I mean, even at the family level, I was talking to a friend, and we meet every few months, and she said, you know, staying at home and being with my teenagers, I realized that I'd lost touch with them. And this has been an amazing opportunity for me to rethink my parenting. Well, wow, what a gift that was.
Yeah. And I know also the other part that you mentioned, the sadness, the grief, and so on. On March the 27th, after lockdown had started in India, Daddy Jayanti, physical age but young at heart, 104 years, decided to fly away. And thousands of people across the world wanted to be here to be with her for that last ceremony, but of course they had to then be content with just sending their loving thoughts and good wishes from a distance. And I know this sort of situation has happened to many, many families. And so, yeah, that's part of the story.
It is, and I think it, you know, it causes to reflect on the question that both you and I are very familiar with, and that is, who am I? At the deepest level of my being, who am I? Right. Because when you're faced with death around you, we can, obviously there's grieving and there's missing people, but there's also that larger perspective, which is, everybody is a soul having this wonderful three-dimensional physical human experience. And we don't lose consciousness when we die. We just become conscious of the other world where we came from. And so, we think this is it, but actually we're in a much bigger system of consciousness. And it gives us a moment to reflect about that.
Well, thank you for bringing that in, because yes, definitely, my own spiritual journey has been based on that statement of who am I? And you might have heard Dadi Janki with her famous 3 Om Shantis. And she would explain that the first Om Shanti is, who am I? And the second Om Shanti is, who do I belong to? And the third Om Shanti is, what must I do now? And so we've come right into the heart of the subject of spirituality and society. And yes, I think that, as you said, our vision had become very, very narrow. It had focused just on our physical dimension and our experience here in the world of matter. But there is a bigger picture. There's a continuity of consciousness, there's a continuity of the soul. And if I can be aware of that, then yes, definitely, there's constant hope for the future. Death is literally just simply a transition, and there is something beyond.
And so there's a bigger picture. That's the big picture we've been talking about. But I sort of think there's a smaller big picture, if I may put it that way, and that is, and you hinted at this earlier, that it's causing us to think about the world we live in and how we get together and how we cooperate. How do we take care, not just of each other, but of the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden, we're beginning to see that the human species isn't as resilient as we thought it was.
And also that without the interference or intervention of the human species, we are seeing kangaroos on the streets of Adelaide. There's this very lovely video clip that has gone viral. And so they're showing how the animals have taken over the streets in the city centers, and the waters in Venice canals are clean. The water of the Ganges has become more beautiful than ever has been seen in a lifetime. And from some of the places about 200 kilometers away from the Himalayas, now they can see the snow-capped peaks, which they haven't seen for 30 years. So human intervention or interference at a minimum now, and you're beginning to see the beauty of nature being revealed again.
So the question will be, do we want to continue to embrace these wonderful things? And if so, we have to change our way of being as a civilization, as a species. And that, I think, is the big question that is going to come up now. What is it that we want? Because we've never had, it's never been forced upon us, but now we've got it. We say, oh my God, I like this. So how do we create this new way of being? That's going to be the big question.
It was very interesting because a few years ago at the climate change conferences that I've been attending as part of the Brahma Kumaris delegation for about 10, 11 years now, the last few years have focused on lifestyle change, because whatever it is a scientist told us, the emissions just kept increasing year by year, and nothing was changing that. Governments were very reluctant to take any steps to make it happen, because of course then you're unpopular with the voters and what you could do at the next elections. So nothing was changing. Things were just carrying on, but people recognized for the last few years that behavior change, lifestyle change was absolutely critical. And that's what we're talking about now.
It is. And you raised an interesting point there about our leaders, because my opinion is that most of our political leaders are actually followers, and they're following public opinion. And that's how they get elected, by being popular. And so this pause in our whole way of being, this time for reflection, is causing people to think again. And so now, if people want something different, then we'll see, perhaps, I'm hopeful, that political leaders will say, yes, let's get on with that. And actually, I mean, as I said, they're just really followers of public opinion. So we're seeing a possibility of a major shift in the dynamics of governance hidden away behind this happening. At least that's what I think.
Mm. I think that people are divided. On the one side, they enjoy the busyness of modern life and the materialistic comforts that that has given us. And then on the other side, they see a more simplified style of living in which you are getting back to family feeling, like your friend and her teenage sons. We're getting back to the roots of human consciousness in terms of society, where love and trust and joy are the important things that prevail, rather than the bank balance and the big house and the big car and so on and so on. And so, which side am I going to go on? And is it going to be possible to maybe manage a balance between comfort in life, but also maintaining the spiritual values, which are the bedrock of civilization?
That leads us into a couple of topics, at least in my mind, and that's the whole idea of well-being. You know, we've been focused on happiness as a measure of how people of progress, but I'm not fond of the happiness movement, because I think we should be going for joy and well-being, so that's a different approach. And so this pause has given us a chance to think about well-being. And there's another aspect which has come up for me. I've been saying, I went to, so let me go back. I went to a conference at the World Bank 30 years ago where I heard somebody say that business is a wholly owned subsidiary of society, and society is a wholly owned subsidiary of the planet. And so if our planet crashes, our society crashes, and then our business will crash. Well, actually, what we've just seen is that business is a wholly owned subsidiary of society, and if society crashes, business will crash. And this is exactly what's happened. Now, that I find it to be the, you know, I've been repeating that for 30 years, and it's actually happened in my lifetime. Businesses are failing all over the world, and they are failing because society has crashed. And so this is a wonderful wake-up call for our global society to think again. But in thinking again, we have to get past our national identities. We've got to become transnational. We have to become and live as souls together on the planet.
Okay, rather than the word transnational, which might be a bit scary for some people, which is equally scary, and that is spiritual. And
yes.
Is it possible?
Sure, no, I wasn't precluding spiritual. I was talking in the language of most of the people who are not so spiritual, you know.
Sure.
I know, and I would even go beyond spiritual. I would say that you know, spirituality is a journey that we can all go on, and it has amazing advantages. But actually, at least for me, I speak for myself, that I'm more interested in the destination, and that's the destination of soul awareness. And so everything I do of a spiritual nature, I see as leading me into soul awareness, living as a soul, living from a higher state of consciousness. So how do I do that? Well, I do that by releasing fear from my life. And as you know, in the BK movement, one of the best ways of doing that is to meditate on a regular basis, because it gives you that sense of inner peace. Yeah. Of course, once you come out of the meditation, having found that inner peace, applying it in your day-to-day life is not always easy.
You know, our first lesson is of soul consciousness when we start on the spiritual journey. But we always say that it's also the last lesson, because to maintain that highest consciousness of my spiritual identity takes constant attention. And if my attention drops for a moment, hey, I'm back again in my physical consciousness, a very limited, narrow consciousness of gender and age and nationality and all those things. And so to maintain this awareness of the inner being and radiate that light and be that light is a journey.
So are there particular teachings within the BK movement that having come to that realization that on a daily basis, practical things that you can do? I'm thinking of one in particular where whenever I visit your homes, offices, call them what you will, you know, every hour there's a little gong.
That's right.
And so
Yeah.
are there other, and that's just a reminder.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let me find my inner peace. Are there other things that BKs do to keep them on path in terms of remembering that who they really are?
The whole timetable that we follow, rising very early in the morning to spend time just recharging this inner battery, and then having spiritual study together, even though we have lockdown, yet everywhere in the world we have classes going on online. And so it's become a whole new way to approach study, but we're connected everywhere. And so what happens with that is that the silence first thing in the morning is really to reset the compass, make sure that I've got my priorities where they should be, and connect with the inner being and the qualities, the values that I have. Then when I study the lesson, and we do the same lesson across the world in about 20 plus different languages, and we study the same lesson. And so if I'm communicating with the other side of the globe, I'll know what they've studied, they'll know what I've studied. And so it creates a fantastic bond. But it also makes us again come back to the basic values that we need to be practicing and experiencing in our life. So every day the lessons are a reminder of that. So that's a very good start to the day. Then, as you said, what we describe as traffic control, stopping regularly every hour on the hour so that we're able to just have that moment of reflection and going inwards. And then at the end of the day, in the evening, again, we have a sacred time, 7 to 7:30 meditation in the evening, and that's local time everywhere, but it means it's a rolling time. So everywhere across the world, there's people in silence and meditation, sending out those good vibrations. And at the end of the day, just to have an audit for the self, that's very, very valuable. How did I do today? What was the quality of my consciousness? Was there something new that I learned today? Was there something I could have done differently today? So if I do that self-audit, then it means that I'm learning and I'm moving forward on a daily basis. And that's absolutely vital for spiritual journey, because if I'm stuck, I'm not moving forward with something new happening in my awareness and in my life, then it's a day that's not been such a good day. It's a day that's been lost.
Yeah. So as you know, I have an approach to the things that we're talking about, which comes more from a psychological background. Although originally I was an engineer many years ago, but anyhow, I've been studying psychology all my life. And so these moments, this audit that you talk about of my day, I think about an audit in terms of, well, yes, so where did I feel joy? You know, where was I doing anything that brought me joy? And on the other side of the scale was, what fears came up for me? What subconscious fears raised their head and affected my energy field, my body, my mind? And because it's those fears that are, from my perspective, that I feel, you know, block this quality of life that I'm wanting to experience which I call soul consciousness. So I've never heard you mention fear, so I was wondering how that.
You know, the whole practice of the experience of being that inner being, the soul, the being of light, which is without shape or form on a physical external level. And so I'll bring in another word, and that is eternal, no beginning and no end. And so consciousness never dies, soul never dies. And so that takes care of a lot of the big fears that we have. Like, am I afraid of death? Well, I'll only know when I actually have to face it. But at this moment, I'm not thinking, well, what if I were to fly away? Because there's an awareness that this body is perishable and it can go, matter will return to matter, dust to dust. But the identity of the self actually never dies. And so that big fear of death doesn't really bother me. But little things, yes, I can be afraid of snakes. I can be afraid of spiders. I can be afraid of viruses. And so then I have to remind myself, well, all these things are there for a purpose. And so if there's a snake, am I able to just stand still and not scare it? It's probably as scared of me as I am of it. And so can I be stable and silent and even have good wishes? And I've seen one of our yogis demonstrate that. She was in a very intimate proximity of a snake, and all she did was become very, very still. And she just gave good wishes, good vibrations, and the snake kindly just left. And so I know that these things are possible. It's possible to deal with any situation in that way. I remember being in a scary situation in which I saw a mob attack a person. At that moment, when I saw this mob ready to attack this man who was quite innocent, something stirred within me, and I just went into the middle of the mob. And I was about 25 years old, so maybe age was a factor, but also I was already in a white sari, so just went out in the middle of that mob, and they just stood back and let me step in. And I put my hands across the man, said, "Stop, stop, the police are coming." And they were so shocked, they didn't know what to do. And so they just stopped. And so it was those few moments in which then the police did come and things got sorted out. So I was thinking, well, if I'd stopped and wondered, what shall I do? I think I would have got scared. But because at that moment, just compassion took over, and I was just moved by that compassion, there was no fear. So I know that when there's love and when there's compassion, then you can deal with fear in a very positive way so that it doesn't impact your actions, but you're able to go above it.
You know, you were in the present moment, and you stayed in the present moment, and therefore you could receive the communication around what it is that you had to do. And if you hadn't have stayed in that present moment, then you would have opened the doorway to the future and your fears. Because, you know, fear is, you know, it's about what is going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Fear is all about the future, whereas anger is mostly about the past. And and so staying in the present moment is really the key.
Yeah.
And also, I'm very fond of saying this, and sometimes my friends laugh at me a little bit, but I say, you know, the key is not to have any needs. If you've got needs, then you open the doorway to fear. So if you can rely on your soul and trust your soul always to supply all your needs, then you can stay in the present moment, and no matter what is going on, you can stay at peace. And that's, you know, that is so hard to learn. It's taken me a lifetime anyhow.
what makes it easier to learn is if you've had that experience, that you know that when you're in that higher consciousness of your spiritual identity, you know that you have access to all the treasures of the values that you carry within yourself. And as a result of that, you know that it's these values that are going to carry you through any problem or difficulty, and also help you in terms of your needs, because you can have all the things that the world can offer and yet still feel empty inside. And that's happened to so many people. But when you're full inside, then the external needs are very, very minimal.
Humans are, well, of course, we're interesting creatures, but we're also what I call meaning-making machines. In other words, no matter what's going on, we try and make meaning of it. And it's like built in. And you can tell it's built in. It's a DNA thing about how do I survive, because I have to make meaning of this snake, this spider, etc., etc. We were talking about fear and how if you can be in the present moment, then you can be outside of fear. And by the way, if you're living in the present moment, you're outside of anger, because anger is about the past and fear is about the future. Yeah. That's what we were talking about.
And present is also about gratitude. What it is I have already, rather than what I want or I think I'm going to need. So yes, it's a very interesting way to put it. Fear of the future and anger from the past, but let me stay in the present, in my real consciousness of who I am. And my heart is filled with gratitude and therefore can be very generous and giving.
So when I say that, anger is about the past, it's about unmet needs from the past, which are in your memory and are triggered because when you were young, you didn't get those needs met, and subconsciously they're still there. And so reminding yourself that you have no needs is not just something that goes for the present moment. It can also be something that says, well, yeah, I can heal my past because actually this memory that I have of anger about not getting my needs met is just a memory. It doesn't apply in the present moment anymore. Mm. So being present, and I think that's, huge part of the BK teachings is like being
present. I've lost your voice again, Richard.
Okay, a huge part of BK teachings is about being present, I was saying.
Yes, definitely. The other aspect about being in the present is that I want to make good use of each moment that I have. I had a very interesting note from somebody who's in Sarajevo, and the husband's German and the wife is from Sarajevo, and she grew up during that whole period when the war was going on. And she said that we had to live a day at a time. And you couldn't think about tomorrow. There was no point in thinking about yesterday. And so if you were in the present, then you wanted to make the best possible use of that moment. And so it's a mantra that I know that Jayanti lived by. What I need to do, let me do it, not just today, but let me do it now. So how can I make the best possible use of my time now during lockdown so that I'm not saying, oh dear, woe is me and what's going on with the world and all the negative self-talk that comes in, but to see the opportunities and to use those opportunities at this moment now.
Exactly, and I think that can be very challenging if your mode of living or if your income, you can no longer earn any money. Your job is no longer available to you, and you immediately get into, well, how am I going to survive? I remember watching a video of some people in Italy a week or two ago who was saying, I've used all my savings now. And that must be absolutely true in India. Millions of people don't even have any savings. And so the question arises, well, what am I going to do today to stay alive?
Mm.
And again, it comes back to your attitude, and the trust, trust in the universe that everything will be okay, and that, and even if I die, well, that might be a liberation. It's hard.
It's actually, you've touched on a situation that I was just reading about this morning, and that was the horrific situation of the migrant workers in India, and multi-thousands wanting to leave the cities and go back to their families and the villages that they came from. And for them, it was very clear that their village, their home, meant that there would be family, there would be comfort, and there would be food. And so that whole system of materialism, in which we think that work is only possible in big cities, or where we left behind a simple life in a rural area and we want the materialistic comforts of big cities, I think that's really now going to be a pattern that people are going to be thinking about and exploring, because at least in the rural area, you can grow vegetables and you can survive. You can have a simple life, but you're with your family and their survival. And I'm not promoting poverty on any level, but I'm just seeing that in a situation like this, there are people who begin to see the beauty of simplicity. And so maybe that's another one of the qualities that we need to be thinking about for all of us across the world. Can I simplify my needs so that it's not my needs that motivate me and guide me, but it's my inner values that are able to guide me again?
I'd be interested to know your reflection on, what is the opportunity here that you see for BK movement? Because I see opportunities for myself and my wife, but I'd be interested to know what you see as opportunities.
People beginning to appreciate the need for introspection, people beginning to appreciate the value of family life and relationships. Whereas previously, it was always a task that was the most significant and the most important. But now maybe I think they recognize that I have to be able to look after my own inner needs and make sure that internally I'm strong and well. And if I'm strong and well inside, then I can take care of my family. And relationships are vastly more significant than the task. And so I'm seeing that the benefit of this has been to allow people to recognize the value of these three things in that order, that sequence. So taking care of the inner being first, then taking care of my family, and then, yes, whatever is the task, it'll get done. And maybe it'll get done in a shorter space of time because I'll be more focused. I'll be internally content. And so I can focus more on the task and get it done more swiftly and more precisely. And I'm seeing that people are turning more to spirituality across the world, where we would have maybe 80 people come to a lecture in Spain. Now they're getting 1,000 people online. So it's numbers like this. In Italy, the same. Italy, people are very family oriented, and so to leave family and come to an evening lecture was not part of the scene. And the figures have jumped considerably there also. So I'm seeing that spirituality has become something that people are turning to again.
Yes, and yeah, that's very interesting. And I want to relate this to a world I know very well, the world of business. So, what has been the impact on employees and businesses? Obviously, there's been a financial impact, but this experience actually has improved organizational cultures because the employees are beginning to recognize that their leaders care about them and therefore are beginning to trust them. That's one advantage. Second advantage is working from home. Actually, people have been more productive. And so that's another benefit. But the point I want to get to is the third one, which aligns with what you're saying, is that people have found this an opportunity for learning. Now, you are pointing to the opportunity for spiritual learning, but actually people are turning to all sorts of opportunities for learning, because fundamentally, I believe we all want to grow and develop. And so having this online possibility to grow and develop, I think is an amazing thing. And what I also find for myself, I kind of got this message 2 years ago, and about building an online e-learning platform to cover all the books that I write and everything. And just before Christmas, I decided to work on that before we'd even heard of coronavirus. And you know, I'm going to be launching that next week or the week after, online learning platform. And I just think, wow, what amazing guidance I was getting to do that. And rationally, I could have argued, well, you know, I want to leave a legacy, and you know, all the books I've written. But actually, I think it goes deeper than that, and I think it's about helping people find a deeper level of well-being, and of course, there are many, as you know, there are many ways to go up the mountain. You know, and people are all at different starting points. And so one of the things that, as you know, I've been working on for 20 years or more is how to build values-driven organizations. I saw values as a way into this whole domain that we're talking about here. And so, yeah, I'm fascinated by this fact that people are taking this time to grow and learn.
Right.
And on the one hand, and on the other hand, people are taking this time to find their roots and to look down into the essentials of family and place, because place also is playing a really important role. In your example there, people are going home, not just physically, but also they're going home internally too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where they find safety, security. Yeah. So, wow. I'm so fascinated to see what changes take place at the global level in the next 2 or 3 years.
The other thing that I am seeing also is, for example, the University of Oxford and their research people there, people researching into vaccines. And just yesterday I was hearing about this, that they're cooperating with one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and it happens to be in India. And so they're cooperating across the world, across barriers, to create a vaccine that can be made available as soon as possible. Now, how soon, who knows? But certainly this sort of cooperation across oceans, maybe it would not have been so easy before December, but certainly it's happening now as a reality, or where people in homes, if they know that there's somebody who's vulnerable and they're able to feed them, they're going to make sure that they get fed. Things like this are happening. So that quality of cooperation in which the human species is now rediscovering that this is what humaneness and being human is all about. It's not about competition, it's not about conflict, but rather it's about cooperation. That whole awareness is coming about in a very beautiful way. So crisis is the opportunity to see this also.
It is, and I know at our last meeting I mentioned to you the fact that I've been measuring global consciousness 2014, 16, 18, and again last year. I just got the results from last year. And what was striking was that over that period, 14, 16, 18, consciousness in the world was actually increasing. But in 2019, it dropped significantly. And it was, and one of the areas where it dropped, because I use 17 indicators to figure out what the consciousness of the world is. The most significant indicator of drop in consciousness was in social cohesion. Mm. You know, at a national level, because all of the data is based on a national statistic. So having seen social cohesion climbing and then suddenly dropping, this tells me that when people were getting more, there was more discrimination and more focusing on differences. And so this epidemic or pandemic has actually, it's a wake-up call on that social cohesion, because it's like, okay, we're all in this together. And so I'm going to be fascinated to see what next year's data shows. I just got the data for 2019. I'll get the data for 2020 and 2021. I'll be so intrigued to see whether in fact social cohesion is going to go up. I mean, because that's the natural, that's what we would expect from what you were just saying and what I believe is happening. And so being able to monitor that and measure that, I think, is important.
It's very interesting that I've always believed in values, and I know that they lie within the soul. And so it's through soul consciousness, as you put it, that we can enhance those values. But I never ever thought that we'd get to a point where we'd actually be able to measure the impact of values in society. So I'm very excited to hear you talk about this and to know that this is actually something that's happening.
Yeah, well, you know, 23 years ago, I invented a way of measuring values in organizations, and that's now, we've been doing that for thousands of organizations all over the world. And so this new work I've been doing on nations is relatively new, just in the past few years. But you see, you know, I have this little mantra that goes on in my head. You know, if you can measure it, you can manage it.
It's a good mantra. Very good.
and so, and that's, yeah, well, if anybody's, actually, if people want to see that, they could go to the Barrett Academy website. But on that website, there is a globe. And you can take your cursor and you can touch the globe and you make it turn. And you can put your cursor on a particular country and you can find out how that country ranks in terms of consciousness in 145 nations. Now, that data is there, and there's also data from 2014, 16, and 18. At the end of this week, this coming week, we'll have the 2019 data up there too. And so you will have some new data on the globe and the new data on the table. Yeah, anybody who's interested in that, what's going on in different countries, then they can find out by doing that. And something else, well, we're talking about measuring values. The Barrett Values Centre, which is the original organization, now I started the Barrett Academy. The Barrett Values Centre is actually doing a global survey at this minute on the impact of the pandemic on business and on employees. And so you can go to valuescenter.com or Barrett Values Centre, and you can participate in that global survey. The results will be in about a couple of weeks, but you know, quite a lot of people are cooperating, and this will be helpful because, and that is about measuring values. What values did you see in your organization before the pandemic? What values do you see now? What values would you like to see afterwards? It's going to give us a roadmap of, you know, before, during, and after.
I'm interested in this whole thing about measurement of values, etc. But many, many years ago, like way back in the late 80s, we asked people across the world, what are the values that are most significant for them? And then it took us a long time to get all the information. But they came up with a list of 12 different values. And probably you're also aware of the same list. But it was very interesting. The first 9 values of all countries everywhere was the same.
Yeah.
And then the last 3 were a little bit different in each place. So there were local differences too, but the first 9 were just the same. So
Yeah.
it was things like cooperation and freedom and happiness and honesty and humility and love and peace and respect, responsibility, simplicity, tolerance, unity. These were the 12 values that came up from that list from across the world. And so it was very interesting for us to see how synchronized that was. You know, it wasn't that people were talking about thousands of different values, but basically it was these 12 values that everybody felt were the foundation for a better world. And so if you can measure it and manage it and create a better world from this, fantastic.
Yeah, well, that reminds me, you know, we've been, if you go to the Barrett Values Centre website, you can do a personal values assessment, and over 1 million people have done that. And so they picked out the top 10 values. So we have something very, very similar. Now, except that what we do is we categorize values by levels of consciousness, and there are 7 levels. And I won't go into the model, but it's basically an extension of Maslow's model with a bit of Vedic philosophy thrown in the self-actualization area. But the top 4 values are all at level 2 consciousness, which is to do with relationships. It's about family, friendship, caring. And so, you know, it comes back to these fundamental human values. Now, we call them human values, but I think you'd agree with me, they're actually soul values.
Yeah. Because values actually lie within the soul itself. And so they're human values, but they're very spiritual values. And
Yeah.
so it definitely, it's as I develop that consciousness to a higher and higher level, I'm able to access those values that are stored within me and start expressing them in my life, even if circumstances might be a little adverse and might not be so conducive to be able to express them. But say, for example, honesty. I know many people would say that honesty is so important, and yet then they'd say, but in today's world, it's not so easy. And yes, I understand that too. But the more I practice this higher consciousness, the easier it becomes to follow what I know is absolutely my inner core value in my life. It gives me the power and the strength to be able to maintain that.
I've researched honesty over age groups in the UK, and it's interesting that as we get older, honesty becomes more important. Because I think it's because our experience with honesty corroborates the fact that it actually makes us feel good. So the younger that you are, the less open you are to honesty, and the older you get, well, you begin to see the benefits.
I didn't realize that it was age related.
Yeah, it is. Oh, actually, you know, the 7, I have another model, the 7 stages of psychological development, which are pretty much by age. And at each stage, we have different needs. And so whatever you need is what you value. So your values are an expression of your needs. So at each stage, there are different needs and different values. So there's the core values, which are the soul values. And then there are other values, like teenagers, for example. One of their important values is recognition. They want to be seen. You know, they want to know that their lives matter. And they want to be seen and recognized by their peer group or by their parent. And so recognition plays into the idea of self-esteem and is an important value for young people. And achievement also is an important value at that time. You know, when you get to my age, you really don't care about achievement anymore.
Well, you already done a lot, so
Yeah,
you
I've
don't
already
need
done
to
a lot,
think
but I mean,
about it.
it's not driving me. It's not like driving me on a daily basis. Like, oh,
Sure.
gosh, I've got to get this. Oh my God, I've got to look good. No, I mean, yes.
Yeah, it's not so
So
important.
all I'm trying to illustrate here is that
Yeah,
as we go through life,
yeah,
our so-called needs change, our values change, or what's important to us can change. And so it's during these last stages of development, the last three stages, you know, focused on self-expression, connection, and contribution. And these are, for me, I think these are fundamental requirements of the soul, feeling a sense of well-being in your physical body. Self-expression, connection, contribution.
Richard, I want to ask you a question, and it's a little bit sensitive. We've been talking about soul and consciousness and values. Would you see any place for God within all of this?
Well, you're right, it's a very interesting question. You know, I constantly reflect on this, and so I'll give you a couple of answers that one I used to give, which is, look, I know, I used to say I have a soul, and now I don't say that anymore. I say I am a soul.
Correct.
And, and I used to say, well, look, you know, what I'm worried about is my relationship to my soul, and I'm going to let my soul worry about its relationship to God. That's what I used to say, because it was like, if I can get close to my soul, then, you know, that's the same as being close to God, because that's what that's the purpose of my soul. And then I began to realize actually that I had a slightly different interpretation of God. And of course, everybody has a different interpretation of God. And for me, God is the universal energy field. And I'm an aspect of that universal energy field. So I'm an aspect of God. Everybody, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at another aspect of God. Everybody's an individuated aspect of God, an individuated aspect of the universal energy field. So I use the word universal energy field for God, simply because I don't know why, to tell you the truth. It's a good question why I do that. I tend to, sometimes God can be a very divisive conversation.
Sure.
And so universal energy field, nobody knows what that is, and that's can get away.
Well, I use this term, the source or the divine, and I find that that takes me beyond the sort of obstacles that normally come up when you use the word God. So people seem to have an allergy to that word, understandably, because of all recent history.
Yeah. And of course, you sort of say about God, you get into the old discussion about truth and morality, and it's like opens up a whole Pandora's box of questions which different religions approach differently.
Yeah.
And so I think you agree with me. We need to transcend all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so soul consciousness is absolutely the right way to be able to transcend all differences. And I think that soul consciousness then does make us aware of this universal energy field that you spoke of. And once you tap into that, there's not just me and my values, but there's also an energy that surrounds us all and is able to bring us all into that higher consciousness, and is able to give us all that love and peace that we need so much, so desperately. So I think that that's the role of the universal energy field.
Which brings us all the way back to the beginning of our conversation in a way, and it's rather timely because we've only got a couple of minutes left, and that is, it comes back to who am I?
Yeah.
It really, this is so fundamental, you know.
Yeah.
It was about 4 years ago now. I was giving a seminar at a university, and there were business people there, and it was rather adventurous, this conference, because it was talking about spirituality in the business world. And I did this the first time I ever did this. And I had to have a lot of courage to do it. So I said to everybody in the audience, there were about 200 people, I said, I'm going to make a series of statements and please stand up if this is correct for you, if this statement is correct. So I said, I have a car, and people stood up, and then I said, I am a car. Because nobody stood up. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I got to the point, I said, I have a soul. Everybody stood up. And then I said, I am a soul. And nobody sat down. They stayed standing. And I said, well, you're all very confused. You don't know whether you have a soul or you're a soul. Well, I know where I stand on that. I am a soul. And so I've done that ever since. You know, in all my business seminars, everywhere I go, I do that little exercise. And it's like a cognitive dissonance that occurs when you say you're two different things, and you can't live with that. And that is a great point for then asking the question, well, who am I?
Richard, I have a suggestion. We've just got about 1 minute left. Should we just spend that 1 minute in silence so that this last message of yours really gets home to everyone? That I am a soul. And it changes perspective on life totally. And thank you so much for everything. And I'm sure we'll meet personally at some time soon. But until then, we'll stay in touch through soul consciousness. So just let's come back to the awareness of the inner being, the soul. I am the light that shines in the forehead. I am peace. I am love. I am. Om Shanti. Thank you so much, Richard. And I'm sure that all those who've been watching and listening have appreciated everything that's been shared.
Well, I certainly have.
Good. And all good wishes for all the fantastic work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.